Okay, I'm going to take you through the creation of your project, starting from the page that you'll find if you go onto the Google Classroom. So you've got a simple starting point, a simple template, space for your title and your name. When you're choosing your title, it's best to go for something quite specific and punchy. Don't be too vague. Try and pick something that's going to be quite edgy and controversial and grab the reader's interest. So my title is going to be, Will Artificial Intelligence Destroy Humanity? Pop in your name. And then the next step is to create a template for the different sections. And the template which I recommend you use is described in the information that goes with the EPQ assignment. So for a dissertation you should have the following sections: an abstract, an introduction, a literature review, a discussion, conclusion, an evaluation, a webliography, and a bibliography. The difference between those two, by the way, webliography, obvious, is for websites, and bibliography is for books and journals. So pop those on the starting page, and what you can then do is stylize them. I won't do them all now, but if you pick up, let's say, for example, a heading like that, and click up here on the styles bar, you can change that to heading 1, and you'll see it turns into a bigger font. And then you can go through making each of these different sections headings. Tempting to go for heading 2 at this point, but you'll notice that heading 2 is really a subheading. So each of these are headings, heading 1s, the main sections for my project. Next time I'm on a desktop, there's a little function which will enable me to insert a table of contents at the start of my project, and the table of contents will pick up on your section headings. So you go through, stylize the rest of those, and then we've got a template. We can actually start work on our project right away. Okay, so this isn't a contents page, this is the real project here, the outline of it. So I'm going to actually start work on each of these one of these sections. Just very briefly, the abstract is a very short summary of the entire project in a couple of hundred words. You don't need to write that until the very end. The introduction is a little bit longer, maybe about 700 words, where you explain your question, you explain what the key words in the question mean, you explain why it's an important issue, and you generally provide an introduction to the project, setting the scene for the reader and giving them some indication of where you're about to go in the subsequent sections. Quite similar, what's in the introduction is going to be quite similar to material you'll have put on your proposal form. But again, I wouldn't worry about writing the introduction at this stage. Best to do that at the end of the project when you understand what the whole thing is going to look like. Literature review, that's the research base for the project, where we gather up all the relevant information and all the facts that we're going to need, all the different opinions, the story behind our project, a bit of history probably is going to come in there just to set the scene. The key thing about the literature review is that you're reviewing what other people have said and thought and written and done, but you're not really giving your own opinion at this stage. So the literature review is gathering up of information, linking it all together, showing how it's relevant to your question, but it doesn't involve you in actually giving any opinion. By the time we get to the discussion though, we will be giving an opinion, because the discussion is the section of the project where you actually need to answer your question, using the material, using the evidence that you found in the literature review to defend a particular answer to the question. So in my case, will AI destroy humanity? Yes or no? How am I going to argue that? And as part of the discussion, it's important that you consider counter arguments. So think about alternative viewpoints, think about the evidence that can be given in favour of different answers to your own. So very much like a debate. You're putting one argument and then critiquing it, and then going to an alternative opinion, critiquing that, trying to establish where the truth lies. And obviously that will involve you writing more about your own ideas and from your own point of view. Conclusion summarises the project, repeats the main points in 200 or 300 words. Evaluation, that's a review of the project process where you explain how it's gone, what you've learned, what you would do differently next time, how you might extend the project if you could continue it, what takeaway messages you're going to use in the future if you're doing another project. So a reflection really on the process of the project rather than the actual contents. And webliography and bibliography are lists of the sources that you have used in your project. Now here there's various different tools you can use to help you create those. Whilst you're working on the iPad, we're a little bit limited because some of the useful functions that are available on the desktop are not so easily to access from the iPad. So I'll show you a way of just keeping track of your sources whilst you're working on your iPad, and when you go onto the desktop there's a couple of tools you can use to actually create a proper webliography and bibliography, and I'll mention those in a little while. Okay, so our question is, will AI destroy humanity? I've got to write the opening sections of my literature review. The best way to do the literature review is to plan it out and to think about a structure to it. Don't just gather up lots of information and dump it all into one great big kind of mass. You actually need to have a structure there. So to help me get that structure, I'm going to pull in a website which I'm sure you will have used or be likely to use, Wikipedia. Wikipedia has a few advantages, I think, as we're getting started on our projects. One of them is that there's a Wikipedia page on virtually every topic. So here's our page on artificial intelligence. Another advantage of Wikipedia, if you scroll down, is that it's quite nicely organised, and the topic headings suggest the kind of areas that you're probably going to need to research in order to understand your topic. So you can see that there's a section on some history, which is going to be helpful. So I think we'll have some history as part of my research. Maybe we'll have a look at some different approaches to artificial intelligence, showing that it's more complicated and that we were aware of that. The philosophy and ethics is going to be important because I'm speculating about the future. So I'm going to have a section on philosophy and ethics. And then there's a section about fiction, so I might have a section on AI and fiction as well. That's a pretty obvious topic area. So this gives me a nice little structure for organising my research. It's much better to try and have some headings so you can tell a story effectively, rather than just bunching up lots of information and making it pretty unreadable and pretty boring. Let's try and make it more interesting for the reader. Let's have a little bit of a story, a narrative structure. So you'll notice that I'm stylising these headings now as heading 2s, and what that means is that when you next go on your contents page and update your contents page, which you'll have to do on a desktop, these come out as subheadings. So now we're ready to go. We've got a structure, we've got some subheadings, we've got a plan. I'm about to start getting some information from my source and summarising it, but before I do that, I think it's helpful to include some pointers to the reader, what we call signposts. Signposting is a really valuable technique if you're trying to make your reader feel that you know what you're doing and you know where you're going in your writing, that you've really thought about it and planned it. And that's important because the reader will subconsciously be much more relaxed and receptive if they get the feeling that the author has actually really thought through the material that they've put into their project. So the opening section, for example, of a literature review, which is going to begin with some history, I might put a sentence something like this. In order to understand current concerns about artificial intelligence, it is necessary to see how the subject has developed over time. We will therefore begin with a review of the history of AI. Okay, notice that I wrote that quite formally. I didn't use the first person, I didn't use I at all. I put it in a neutral and objective way, I did refer to we. That's probably more academically credible because we refers here to you and the reader. And that's a little bit more academically credible as a writing style than just saying, I'm going to start by ... So we've got some signposts there. I've introduced my research, my historical section of my research. So now we actually start writing the history. So I'm going to borrow a little bit from Wikipedia just to get me going. Here's my opening paragraph. So I read through my opening paragraph and then I'm going to summarise some of that information. So looking just here at this first section of the history, it says a little bit about artificial beings as storytelling devices in antiquity. It talks a bit about trying to build a machine to perform useful reasoning. And then the first machines that were produced, calculating machines, engineered. The first calculating machine, it says there, was engineered in the 17th century, 1623. Okay, and then it refers to the fact that AI has been mentioned in fiction, in books like Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. So I've read that, I've got some ideas. I'm going to try and just summarise that in my own words by saying the idea of thinking machines goes back to antiquity, but the first machines capable of actually performing calculations were not made until 1623. Okay. Now this information has come from the Wikipedia page, so I need to include a citation. Now, as I mentioned, there's some tools for doing this, but at the moment, the simplest and quickest way of doing it when you're working on your iPad is just to collect up all the web links and give them a number. So I'm going to call this source 1, and if you drag the web link across to your page, you'll see that it appears. I haven't quite lined that up. It appears there in your document. So that's not a proper citation. That's just a web link at the moment. If I want to turn that into a proper citation, there's a couple of tools I can use when I'm back on a desktop. I can either go on the tools bar on Google Docs and then find the Explore button, and if I use the Explore tool to find the same web page, you'll see when the web page is found that a quote mark appears, and if you click that quote mark, it will create for you a proper citation in a footnote, and you can put that in when you first use the source in your document, and you can paste the citation into the webliography as well. Alternatively, there's an app called EasyBib, which you can download onto your iPad and which is running on the desktop as well. And if you go onto EasyBib and put in the details of the Wikipedia page, it will turn the web page link into a proper citation. And again, you can then just paste that into your webliography. It is important that you learn to construct an appropriate bibliography and webliography. So I would suggest that you either do that using the Explore tool or by using the function on EasyBib.